Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to St. Luke.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests choose a place of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you might come and say to you, give this person your place. And then in disgrace you will start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he might say to you, friend, move up higher, and you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humble, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, if you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they might invite you in return, and you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous.
Santo Evangelio de nuestro Señor Jesucristo según San Lucas.
Gloria a ti, Jesús.
Sucedió que un sábado Jesús fue a comer a casa de un jefe de fariseo y otros fariseos lo estaban espiando. Al ver Jesús cómo los invitados escogían los asientos de honor en la mesa, les dio este consejo. Cuando alguien te invite a un banquete de bodas, no te sientes en el lugar principal, pues puede llegar otro invitado más importante que tú, y el que los invitó a los dos puede venir a decirte, dale tu lugar a este otro. Entonces tendrás que ir con vergüenza a ocupar el último lugar. Al contrario, cuando te inviten, siéntate en el último lugar, para que cuando venga el que te invitó te diga, amigo, pásate a este lugar de más honor. Así recibirás honores delante de los que están sentados contigo a la mesa. Porque el que a sí mismo se engrandece será humillado, y el que se humilla será engrandecido. Digo también al hombre que lo había invitado, cuando des una comida o una cena, no invites a tus amigos, ni a tus hermanos, ni a tus parientes, ni a tus vecinos ricos, porque ellos a su vez te invitarán, y así quedarás ya recompensado. Al contrario, cuando tú des un banquete, invita a los pobres, los inválidos, los cojos y a los ciegos, y serás feliz, pues ellos no te pueden pagar, pero tú tendrás tu recompensa el día en que los justos resuciten. El Evangelio del Señor.
Te alabamos, Cristo Señor. Please be seated.
We're going to be looking at the parable today, and like many others, of course, it could go in many different directions. So we ask ourselves, was Jesus having just a little fun at the expense of the other guests and the seat arranged by the host? Was he frustrated? And he wanted for once and all trying to set the people straight? Was he just plainly saying that they didn't have good manners? Perhaps Jesus was really trying to help the people gathered around the table to rethink the truly important things in God's eyes. Maybe Jesus had a concern, a genuine love for all people, as the scriptures tell us. Nobody enacts the sentiments of this parable like teenagers. I was on the fringes of the in crowd when I was in high school, but never really in. I had friends, of course, who were, and they spent time with me in our mutual pursuits and things, especially music and performance. But when it came to who you socialized with, I never made the list. It was an existence of always being hopeful and often being hurt and disappointed. Fault? I don't know. Mine, theirs? I don't know. I didn't live in town where all these other friends of mine lived. And I didn't have the money or the clothes or the things that my other friends did. I was in all the advanced courses with them. We got along great in the classroom. But somehow I just never made the cut when it came to this socializing. From actually what I've heard of some of those, I'm probably just as happy now in retrospect about that. But I was actually quite well known in my high school of 3,000 students because I was in a thespians club. I acted in plays. I sang and danced my little heart away in musicals. And I was also in a number of the other clubs at school. But in spite of all that, and being known as one of the really smart kids in school, when that was a good thing, still, no social life. I lived out in what you would maybe call the suburbs, and it definitely is now when I go back to visit, but at that time it was actually quite rural, as in we could call the farmer down the road any morning in the summertime and tell him how many dozen heads of corn we wanted and go pick it up in the afternoon and eat fresh corn on the cob if we wanted to. We also had a huge garden. Don't usually find those in suburbia either without a large plot. My father worked in a steel mill, so that was another problem. I was blue collar, and most of my friends had fathers with white collar jobs. One of my friends actually, her mother owned a dress shop, you know, those kinds of things. And we only had one car back in that time, and my father worked rotating shifts in a steel mill. So it was quite hard to find transportation to actually get into town to socialize in the first place. Because actually the kids that did live around me were not involved and had the same interests as I did. I just didn't have the right credentials to be invited to the banquet. Interesting. One of the things that I really love to do is I'd love to have people over for dinner at my house. And often I try to invite for the holidays, especially. People that are alone, and there are a number of us, single people who are new to San Miguel and haven't established a circle of friends yet. And I do this so that they won't have to spend the holiday alone. I can understand the draw and the desire to celebrate with good friends. I really can. But I can't forget my experience of never being invited to the banquet. And you know, this is not unique unto me as a pastor, as a priest, as a minister. There were so many holidays that John and I spent all alone, not being near our children. And I think the people all in the church must have thought, oh, surely someone else invited them. And so we were just sitting home alone most of those holidays. And as I said, it wasn't unique just to me, but in fact, our tradition came to be on Thanksgiving afternoon that we would go to the movies, see the new Christmas flick that was coming out. And it was always amazing to me how many of the other pastors that I knew were there also. You know, since I feel this calling, this urge, this need as a Christian to invite other lonely people to my house, I have trouble understanding why everyone else can't spare just one or two chairs for others to be included at the table. Surely in this community, which is mostly elders, we all know that that clock is ticking. We all know, if we don't already, that we may soon be alone and may well be back to being one of those lonely people. It's hard to think about that after all the people that have eaten at my dinner table. Perhaps because I'm single, I won't be included at any of the dinner tables of those who have sat at one. But it is something that I have to think about from time to time. As Christ followers, we're asked to grow to understand how important it really is to love and to serve our neighbor, to help them be important, even if only for 2 or 3 hours. Attaining social status, success, wealth does not excuse us from humility. It doesn't isolate us from reaching out to our neighbor. In fact, if anything, it requires even more. Because when you're up here, you have to stretch farther to reach the hand of your neighbor sometimes. To reach that hand and ask them to come and spend time at your table and to learn about the gifts that they bring to life in this world as well. Now, true life, real life, comes only in the death of the self that we wear as a mask to keep others at a safe distance. Is the pill just too hard to swallow? It is scary, terrifying to think of dying to that image that we have spent so much careful time creating. Only then to realize that that former life was all a facade, and that we all, in some ways, in here, are also still lonely people. because we can't share ourselves truly and fully with others. It's hard to once again feel the pain and to know that we need also to be loved. We need others to care about us too. Our salvation is not based on our success in life. We as Christians know what God asks of us. So why is it so hard to let go of our constant jockeying for position and status? Well, maybe it's the only game we've ever known. I don't know. Maybe it's because we don't want to be seen as one of the lonely people ourselves. And you know, you start hanging around with those folks, somebody's gonna say something. Work, 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 succeed, succeed. Be important, be important. That is the call of the social climbers. But really, doesn't that get tiring? All of the events you attend, all the invitations you accept. You're retired, and yet you're working harder than you ever worked before just to keep up with all of these engagements that you have, let alone the nonprofits you may choose to serve. To always be working, doesn't it get tiring to just be like the rest of those little rats running around on that wheel in the cage, never really going anywhere? And don't forget the bookkeeping. The bookkeeping is so important, that bottom line. You know, we have to keep score of who has insulted us and who has never invited you back to their house and who you now are obligated to invite to dinner at your house, who offended you, who just simply passed you up. You know, why are we keeping score? If I invite you to my house, it's because I want you to come to my house. And I don't want you to judge my house. I want you to spend time with me as a friend, getting to know and love and care for one another. Jesus didn't live his life like that. He spent over 2 years walking hundreds of miles trying to teach people about a new way of life, an easier way of life, a life free from bookkeeping. He taught that true life, real life, comes only in the death of the self that we wear as the mask. And the reality is that at some point, most of us really do want to get out of that rat race. We get tired. But can we handle the cost? It really requires, for some people, giving up a lot. Many of us start out ignorant, but with a burning desire to learn. But after a while, when we begin to understand how much change it is going to require, how upside down our world will become, how our values and understanding of ourselves will require a complete overhaul, and that we will need to keep practicing this new way of thinking and living until it becomes the only way of thinking and living. So our enthusiasm often begins to fade, and we start thinking that it might just be easier to go back to the old ways. At least then we knew how to play that game. We knew what time and effort it was going to take from us, and it was comfortable. Let's be honest, it was comfortable, you know? It's not so comfortable when you don't have lunch with a friend, but you have lunch with a stranger. And, you know, what if it doesn't work? What if I put all this time and energy, and goodness, when I'm getting older, I gotta watch that energy. what happens if I do all that and it just doesn't seem to make any difference? It's hard to trust Jesus and to believe what he says. It's hard to attain that goal, which is not up, but down. Humility. And so, oftentimes we miss the opportunity to have real freedom, true freedom, to have much less stressful lives by truly just being ourselves. The selves that we often alone know. You know, in many ways, we tend to be like the Mormons. The last parish I served was out in Cheyenne, Wyoming. That's big, big Mormon country. And one of the things that I learned about their beliefs is that the more people that they claim as people that they have met and acted out their faith with, the more points they earn to gain a higher position with God in heaven. They believe in 3 levels in heaven and little subsets within those. And I have to tell you that that's hard for me to believe. Only then, when I think that if I'm going to be with God, what in the world difference is it going to make? Where or space or time or any of that stuff? I think it all just kind of goes away, but that's what I'm thinking. I hired a really fine Mormon woman to be the director of the child care that we established out there. And she was excellent. She was excellent at what she was doing. But when I learned this little thing about Mormons, I was horrified. I was absolutely horrified when I came to realize that each child, each parent, each family, each person that she dealt with in her position was just one more notch on her sainthood belt. I learned that she spent some of her time also preserving food so that when any day of troubles would come along, COVID maybe, that the family would be well cared for. However, I believe it was only for other Mormons, not the rest of us, who had helped her to attain her ranking with God. I spent a lot of time researching yesterday, so I was sure I was telling you all the truth today. I will probably have thousands of new ads from now on from Mormons who want to save my soul. But the reason they don't share is because one of their basic beliefs is in preparedness. We should be prepared for these events. So I guess in some ways I would have to say to you that what I've learned is that Mormons, while they talk about Jesus Christ, really subscribe to a form of works righteousness. There are 5 things they have to attain in order to get into that top level of heaven. And so it's still about achieving and doing and becoming, and not about grace and love and forgiveness and mercy. So sometimes I think that we are rather like them if we go to the constant work of attaining and maintaining our status. Maybe not for the same reason, but we're still doing the same things. You see that? In many instances, this means working and obtaining the favor of others who prove themselves in life by their success in business and their wealth. And you know, you've all heard the old adage about birds of a feather. Well, you find any cliques here in San Miguel? I found a few. So, why worry about those who have not worked hard enough to achieve their own power and influence? So that not just the lonely people who lost another opportunity weep. The ones not in our crowd, but also the entire world weeps. God weeps. It weeps with so many silent tears of wanting to be recognized, wanting to be loved. It's not always our fault that we haven't attained what others have. Oh, that our hearts might become our ears and hear all of this weeping. Oh, that we might grow in our faith to hear the weeping of others and have greater faith in God and what God teaches us. When we are called to include our neighbor at the banquet table, it doesn't always mean forming some big organization to help feed the multitudes. Maybe God is just asking each of us to find a neighbor, just one other lonely person, and to walk with that person in their loneliness for just 2 or 3 hours one day by including them on the guest list to the banquet. If not, God also weeps. For he knows that one day you're also going to weep when you arrive at that great banquet he has prepared for us in heaven, for every single one of us sitting here today, and even a couple of us who are standing. And yes, we will all be included, and we may be stunned and shocked by that alone. But because you couldn't take time, take the risk of being shamed by the company you kept, or you just couldn't believe everything was true, and it was, but because you couldn't take that path, you will see that all of your work, all of the record keeping and the jockeying for position, for recognition, was for naught. God's table is round.